Then I will begin. I'm going to talk this afternoon about one of my favorite topics, but I think it came to me because there's just a lot going on right now, and it made me think about the teaching of the eight worldly winds, which is it's a teaching in equanimity. It's and being with the moment. It's kind of like right now, it's like this, and um, pausing to acknowledge and actually be aware of what's happening. And there's a lot of winds blowing right now. And the eight worldly winds are four sets of pairs that the Buddha said we all experience. It's basically the human condition, and it's praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, and what's usually said fame and ill repute, but I find that's an awkward phrase, and so it can be success and failure, things like that, where we're famous or infamous. And there's a sutta that talks about it, the Lokavipatti Sutta. And in it, the Buddha says, these four winds, these four experiences arise for all beings. And for uninstructed worldlings, which is a phrase I love, it means folks who are not practicing the Dharma, who are not aware, but who are lost in their greed, hatred, and delusion. For those uninstructed worldlings, they don't see or question these experiences, these four pairs. They are in it. They don't reflect. They are consumed by it. They chase one, they chase the pleasant, and they repel the other. So they spend most of their time trying to latch on to the positive, or what they feel is the ones they want, and pushing away the others. However, on the other hand, instructed worldlings see things as it is and reflect on it. Oh, okay, beginning to recognize this is praise, this is blame. Oh, this is some gain, this is some loss. So there's a discernment, there's a an awareness of the experience, rather than just being entangled and lost in it when we're not paying attention. Um, the person who recognizes these four things, or these eight winds, basically ask the question, are they valid? Is it true what's happening, or is it just the human condition, the winds blowing, or are they personal, or are they not personal? And it doesn't demean the whole being. When we experience something, it doesn't mean anything about us. And there's no, do we have no expectations, like it should always be one and it should never be the other. And we don't deny it. It's like right now, it's like this. And it's said that they abandon welcoming and rebelling. It's like, okay, that's the practice of equanimity. It's like right now, it's like this. This is what's happening right now. We abandon welcoming and we rebelling. We don't push anything away. We don't latch on to anything. It's the ebb and flow of life. And um, to understand that, we all have these changing experiences. I used to say that I could just sit here, right here, and not do anything, and all that stuff would happen regardless, you know. And it's just the nature of the beast. It's understanding that this happens to all people. It's just the human condition, and to fully allow ourselves to be with these comings and goings is the path to freedom. It's when we're fixated on a particular one, wanting it or not wanting it, that we begin to suffer. We begin to cause that dissatisfaction, we become dissatisfied with the way things are. This is a basic teaching of the Buddha. When we're not paying attention, we get caught in our automatic reactions. It's our conditioning. We're often taught that one is better than another. We're taught by our families, we're taught societally, and we get into pushing and pulling and wanting and not wanting. And through practice, we get to we get to a place of recognition where there is discomfort. There's joy, there's not joy. There's pleasure, there's pain. There's gain, there's loss. There's praise, there's blame. There's all of these things. And it's not personal, and we can weather the storm or ride the wave or however we want to look at it. And being swept away is this emotional instability, our inability to be with the world as it is. Doesn't mean we condone things. It doesn't mean we don't work to change things that are causing harm, but we recognize right now it's like this. This is the reality of this moment. How do I hold this? And oftentimes what happens if we've experienced the pleasant side of something and then the unpleasant side comes up, we struggle to get back where we were. I remember I was on retreat many years ago, and it was a long retreat. So when I went in, it was like smooth sailing right away. If you've been on a residential retreat, there's all these comings and goings, but I was having a really pleasant experience for the first week or so, and then all of a sudden it started shifting. And I remember in one meditation, I kind of came out of where I was, and I was hunched over on my cushion with my fingers gouging my knees. It was almost like I was trying to force my way back to where I was. I felt like I was behind these blackout curtains on a stage, and I was like trying to force my way to the other side of them. And like that. I was trying to get back to the pleasant because some difficult things were coming up and I didn't want to be there. I shouldn't be here. We get into the shoulds and should this. If I were better at this, this wouldn't happen. That old trap that we think if we get to a certain place, we'll arrive somewhere and then the discomfort won't happen again. We will have arrived. We will have achieved. We will have accomplished. When that's nonsense, because these winds blow constantly. We may achieve great fortune, but we may also lose. That's the first noble truth. There is loss. There is birth. There's death. There's we lose things we love. We're separated from things we love. Uh, there's sorrow. There's grief. There's all of these things. And you think of the five remembrances, where all of the nature to grow old, get sick, and die. Everything we have will be taken from us. All we have are our actions. So to really genuinely experience that is where the freedom is. That's where there's some liberation, not needing things to match, not needing the world to match some idea we think of how it should be, but to greet the world as it is and work with that. Equanimity also can mean an appropriate response to the present moment. How do we respond wisely and compassionately right here, right now? We have to be present. We have to be fully awake in order to understand how to take the next step. So understanding the ebb and flow, the comings and goings is really important. I do a morning meditation, and oftentimes I get this email that's sent out by Sayadaw U Tejaniya's folk. Many of you are familiar with it. It's called the Daily Tejaniya. Sayadaw U Tejaniya is a very wise Burmese monk. He's a really good teacher. And this last week, I loved the one email. They're just short little emails. And it said, a meditation student told Sayadaw her meditations were deeply unpleasant because she had to face a torrent of random thoughts, distracting fantasies, and harsh self-judgments. Do you want it to stop? Sayadaw asked her. Yes, she said. That's the problem, he said. Wanting these things to stop instead of just recognizing, oh, right now there's a lot of self-judgment, or there's the distractions that's just pulling me away. The invitation instead is to be with that. How do we work with these hurricanes, force winds sometimes that are just coming at us? How do we stay grounded? Sati, the word sati, which means usually is translated as mindfulness, also means to be with. It means to be with. Now, there can be a tendency with this teaching just as there are with many of the Buddhist teachings, a tendency to move into a kind of a spiritual bypass. And a spiritual bypass is where we use the teachings to kind of bypass feeling. It's like, oh, everything's impermanent, therefore, oh, well, or, oh, praise and blame, oh, well, gain and loss, oh, well. It's like this denial of our experience. But Lama Rod Owens, this very wise teacher, says, we do recognize, that there is praise and blame and gain and loss and all these things. And we recognize that right now it's like this, but we also have to be fully present to the emotions that arise because of these things. We can mourn what we can't change. We don't say, oh, well, but we're with, oh, there's loss, there's grief. That's an appropriate response to the loss of a loved one or a relationship or something. Or there's joy. We don't deny the emotions, but we're fully present. We see what's happening. We see what's happening. We're touched, but we recognize the vicissitudes of life. Vicissitudes, these teachings are also often called the 8 vicissitudes, another word that nobody uses, which usually means a change in fortune, not for the better. And so when we look at these teachings, we begin to recognize that they're not, sometimes they feel really personal because they're directed to us. If somebody yells at us or calls us names or whatever, that can feel really, really personal. And there's also a way that we've kind of developed stories about each of these. And they're different because of our conditioning, and we all, some of us struggle with some pairs more than other pairs, but we want to find our stories and how we relate to each of these and how they impact us in our lives. For me, I think praise and blame has played a huge part in my life, without being aware of it. It's just kind of how I moved through the world, because I wanted praise. I equated praise with, I'm a good person. And I equated blame with, I'm a bad person. So if somebody praised me, it was like, oh, I'm okay. If somebody yelled at me for something, I was mortified. I was like, oh, I'm a terrible person. And it was really painful. And I remember this going back. I mean, this is deeply rooted. It goes back to when I was a kid. And if I did something and somebody yelled at me, I was just broken up. I thought it meant the end of the world. And so that somehow got conditioned, installed when I was a kid. And I carried it for a really long time, trying to be a perfectionist, because that always works. And so we become really entangled in these stories of shoulds and have tos and musts. And when we can begin to pause and take a step back and go, oh, praise and blame, and maybe recognize the emotions that come up, but they're not sticky anymore. They don't land. And in fact, sometimes it's a joke. It's like, oh, praise and blame, because I've had now, I think when you take a step back, when I don't make them so personal, when I don't give them the gravitas that I used to, even unconsciously, it's a recognition of like, oh yeah, this happens. You can do a certain thing. And I'm sure you've all had this experience, and someone will think you're awesome and somebody else will think you're a jerk. And you're like, I did the same thing, but different people receive it differently. And then you receive their reactivity. And so to have that big clarity, or that larger scope of awareness, is really helpful. And it doesn't mean we don't say, did I cause harm? Because that's the sutta asks the question, is this valid? Oh, maybe I was unskillful. Maybe I did cause harm, and that's why they lashed out, or that's why there was the blame, or whatever it is. And so to take accountability, because this is a practice of accountability, recognizing where our unskillfulness can cause harm, our pain can spill out. and wreak some havoc much of the time. Oftentimes the harm we cause is because we're not paying attention, we're not being mindful, we're chasing something or pushing something away, we're working out of fear. Gain and loss is another thing. We live in a culture that says, what did Vince Lombardi, the old football coach, say? Winning isn't the only thing, it's everything. Or winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. Either way, it's pretty sucky, because that doesn't leave you much room for not winning. And it's impossible to win all the time. There's going to be gain and there's going to be loss. We see this all the time. And it's not if you gain, somebody else loses, and I need to get what you get because there's only so much to go around. That's that place of lack that we come from, it's this fear. I love this phrase. It comes out of 12 steps, I think, that we have, but it's such a Buddhist teaching. It's like we're afraid of losing something we have or not getting something we want. So often it boils down to those two things. I need that to be okay. And I can't lose this, because then what will that mean? Then who will I be? Then how will I get through life if this happens? If I lose my job, if I lose my relationship, if I lose my status. And pleasure and pain. Of course, the preference is for pleasure. Of course, for the most part, most people don't want pain. But it's going to happen. Chasing pleasure, is that second noble truth, the real cause of so much dukkha, so much unsatisfactoriness, is wanting it to be good all the time. And if we just do it right, it'll be pleasant. Into this place, no rain will fall, or whatever. It's impossible. We all experience pleasure. We all experience pain. But chasing it and craving it is the root of dukkha, of our suffering, our discontent. And then fame and disgrace, or success and failure, to, again, that winning at all costs. And what does failure mean? It, for me, tied in with the praise and blame, was that I wouldn't do things if I thought I might fail, because I didn't want to fail. So I'd rather just kind of bypass things than take a chance. And I remember somebody telling me about Thomas Edison. When he was inventing the light bulb, the story goes that it took him, 1,000 tries, which means he failed 999 times. It's part of life, success and failure, fame and disgrace. It's going to happen, So watching that need for one over the other. So again, we all struggle with these, some more than less. I was talking about this last night in class, and a woman shared that she had wanted, forget, she was working and then decided to go back to school, and she got a degree, but she didn't just want a degree. She wanted like magna cum laude with great distinction. And so she worked really hard, really hard. She was just obsessed with that. And somehow she turned in a paper late, or something happened and she failed a class. So she didn't get that magna cum laude on her diploma. And she thought it was a waste of time and so useless, because she's so tied to that need for a particular thing, that praise, that success, that fame. And we have these, they talk about fixed ideas. We have these fixed ideas of shoulds and have tos. And if we don't meet these expectations, we're failures, when it's not true. But it's so hard, because the fear and the worry is deeply, deeply embedded in us, deeply conditioned. Some of you know, my sister-in-law passed away 3 weeks ago tomorrow. She lives up in Northern California, and I'm the executor of her will and the trustee for the trust. And so my job is to sell her house. So I am up in San Jose and meeting with realtors, and I had to choose the realtor that would match my fiduciary responsibility of getting the best deal for the beneficiaries, blah, 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 legalese in my head. And I just was struggling so much with doing the right thing, making sure I made the perfect decision and chose the perfect person and blah, 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 blah. And it was like I was watching this. I'm grateful for the practice because I was able to recognize the feelings in the body that were just kind of wanting to take over, but not letting them. Watching these stories go back and forth about, oh, this or that, especially at 3 a.m. That's when they show up for me anyway. And just watching that battle and just going, this, logically makes the best, this seems to be the best decision. So I'm going to do this, and doing it and just watching that go on, but not becoming entangled in it, because this stuff may not go away. These battles may not stop happening, but we don't have to jump into the fray. That's the gift of awareness. That's the gift of seeing clearly, oh, this is what's happening. One more time, that praise and blame, or that gain and loss is coming into play, instead of recognizing that it's that stuff's just going to happen, and we make the best decision, we do what we can. And the fifth remembrance, all we have are our actions. I'm hopefully moving in a direction that causes no harm, that serves everybody well, and that's all we can do. That's all we can do. We cultivate this wisdom from our experience, and we see that. I always, when I'm in those places of like, I always say to myself also, it's like, this will pass, impermanence, hooray. When you're having a good time, then you're sad about impermanence. But when it's really crappy, you're happy about impermanence. And so this will pass. And then another morning I was laying in bed and my kitties were sleeping on me. And I woke up and it was such a pleasant experience to have these little critters just kind of align with me. And I went, oh, this is pleasant. Be with this. This is pleasure. Hang out with this as long as you can, because this wind will pass and there will be pain and there will be whatever. It comes and it goes, but the practice is to be where we are. I offered in the meditation. Right now, it's like this. So to keep our eyes open, to see truly what's happening, is the important piece of this, is to recognize these winds. It goes right along with the Four Noble Truths. There is suffering, there is dukkha, there's dissatisfaction, our wanting it to be pleasant, wanting the positive, yummy sensory experiences all the time. That's the root of dukkha. And there's a way out, and the way out is this practice, this eightfold path, this seeing clearly. And the eight worldly winds, this teaching is just another lens to see the same stuff that the Buddha talks about. And he teaches so many different people in so many different ways, because some of the lessons resonate with us more than others, or seeing things a different way helps us go, oh, I never thought of that. And so I find this worldly winds really helpful, especially when I'm in situations that I know are not personal, but I want to personalize them. Like the times, I'm sure you've all had this experience too, being in a store and somebody is really annoyed with how long the line is going, and they just start going off way out of proportion to the reality of the experience. And you go, that has nothing to do with this moment. There's just something going on with that person. And so not to take those things personally, that is some freedom. And then finally, the one piece that this is a teaching of equanimity, and to remember that equanimity is one of the heart practices. There's loving kindness, goodwill, metta, there's compassion, there's appreciative joy, and there's equanimity. And I kind of think of it this way. I was thinking about this a few weeks ago, where equanimity is the ground, is that foundation, and that is that appropriate response to whatever arises. And held by equanimity is compassion. If we're greeted with something unpleasant or painful, compassion is the appropriate response. If we are faced with something joyful or pleasant or good fortune or praise, then the appropriate response is appreciative joy for that experience. We don't miss out on either of them. And then it's kind of, the whole thing is held by metta, goodwill, friendliness, kindness. That's kind of the way we move through the world. So this equanimity is a heart practice. It's held with kindness and compassion, and wisdom. It's the clarity and the kindness. That's how we see this, and that's how we kind of loosen the bonds that trap us. And if we do experience discomfort, like I think about the stomach that's tied up in pretzels or tied up in knots, that's a signal to pause and say, what's going on? Or if you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you're stuck in that thing, that thought that just keeps playing on repeat over, that infinite loop over and over and over again, that's a little flag to say, what's going on here? And maybe one of these little wins can be helpful to see, to use to kind of define what the experience is. So that's what I got, my friends. Thank you, as always, for your really generous and kind attention. And I hope this has been of some benefit. And as always, if anyone has any thoughts or comments, rebuttals, blame, praise, I won't take any of it personally. And what do you struggle with? That's always, and you don't have to answer that now, but that's, I invite you to reflect on if any of these kind of touch home or touch a chord, and that you may struggle with one of these. Okay. Well, thank you, my friends, for being here. I guess we get out early today. It's a holiday weekend, so we can go home early, or turn our Zooms off early. Marisol, I think, put a link in the chat to how you can support ICD. Your donations are deeply helpful to sustaining us, as paying for Zoom and supporting the teachers and paying it forward. And so thank you for that. And they mentioned that we have, as you know, the Tuesday night group and the Wednesday sit, peer-led sit, and then the Friday metta, and then Jokai's half day is, I forget the date in September, but it's on the website. And I think an email went out today about it.
It's the 28th.
The 28th, thanks. Okay then, friends, have a good rest of your evening. Be kind to yourselves and be kind to each other. And remember that we don't just practice for our own benefit, but we practice for the benefit of all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free. Thanks, everyone. See you later.